Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode of ctl-alt-del-church, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Suzi Farrant. It's good to have you with us, Suzi.
Great to be here.
So for those of you who don't know Suzi, who are you and why on earth am I talking to you today?
Very good question. So my current role is I am the Young People and Young Adults Development Worker for the Church of Scotland. So I do a whole bunch of stuff trying to encourage youth work, young adult work around the Church of Scotland. So we've known each other for a long time, and it is great to be able to have a conversation.
Brilliant. We have known each other for a long time, and for all of that time, you have been one of the people who I like to listen to, because you're always kind of pushing the church to be better and to be different, and to say, look, here's a thing over here, try this, and particularly obviously around children and young people. But that's, you know, their place in the church and ways of being church that works better for them. We all know there's a huge gap in most of our congregations. When I look out on a Sunday morning when you're able to do that, there are very few people under 40, and that's not unusual. So what are the kind of things that you've been coming up against in the last few years that give you some kind of hope that that's not a kind of terminal position? Or is there anything?
Well, statistics will tell you one story, yeah. But then when you see people and you hear their stories and you hear their passion, that's what gives you hope. So when you start to engage with young people, you start to engage with children and really start to take them as people seriously, so not as kind of people in waiting, but actually proper fully formed people that can experience God and can hear from God and have so much to give and shape us too. That then gives you that sense of hope that, oh yeah, some people are getting this, and this can kind of go, and this can kind of change and move. And I think there's been something in the last few years where folk have kind of got to that stage where they're like almost hopelessness, like they literally don't know where to turn. They've got to that point where they're like, literally everything we're doing is not working. We can't do anything. And they've suddenly realized that they need to change. And it's the realizing that they need to change that then sends them on this journey of, okay, we really do. How can we? And it starts them thinking about, oh, what about this? What about that? What about the other? And then on that experimentation thing. And that then leads to the hope kind of stuff.
So are there some kind of key fundamental things that people have discovered then that, you know, you talk about experimentation, but there must be some things that kind of are common across people's experience that make things better?
Yeah, so I think a lot of folk are starting to recognise that Sunday school as we currently do it doesn't work, mm-hmm. and is kind of an approach that has had its time. And that they need to start thinking about doing something different. And it's when they start to do that they start to think about, actually, do we need to separate out our children and young people from our wider congregation all the time? Or actually, is there something different that our children and young people can help us explore about what church actually is? And that we're a community, we're a people of God, here to do this stuff together, to do life together. And it's as they start to include their children and young people and get them participating in worship and in other things, that they start to recognise that the gifts and that children and young people can bring, and it's just those little seeds that sets them off on this kind of journey.
What does that in practice? What does that look like? Because we still have 5 hymns, 3 prayers, and a sermon, which are all fabulous, I have to say. Particularly the sermon every week's amazing. But at the same time, for a while, we had our children and young people were being involved. They decided they wanted to be in the service at the start, and then they wanted to go off to a fairly traditional Sunday schools. But at the start of the service, they were the ones that led the service. So they were doing the call to worship, they were leading the prayer, they were doing the reading, and then, you know, there was a kind of conversation with them about what that might all mean. And then they would go off and do some exciting things while the grown-ups had to sit and listen to me talking for 15 minutes or so. So what does that, you know, is that what that looks like, or does it look like something else? What?
I think it can look completely different depending on where you are. And what your own context is, and I think that's one of the important keys is kind of recognizing that actually church is, in some senses, meant to look different in different local places, because it's about a community of people, and people are different. So therefore, church is totally okay to look different to the other ones down the road, and we don't all need to look the same. You know, and when people start to grasp that, then that can be really freeing, and allow you to experiment and do other things. So I think I'm always really keen to get folk thinking about, okay, so we're a church community together. How do we do stuff together? So for me, personally speaking, I would get rid of Sunday schools from a Sunday. If you choose a Sunday morning to be the time when you are going to worship together, I would have everybody worshipping together. And probably that might mean it doesn't need to be an hour and a half, an hour long. Actually, it could maybe even be a wee bit shorter than that. And through that, kind of have different ways of participating in worship, using maybe some of kind of Dave Senos's idea around spiritual styles, recognizing that people actually experience God in different ways. And that's the same for children and young people as it is for adults. So actually, by reorganizing things in that way, everybody wins, and everybody's able to kind of participate and experience God together. And then probably what I would then do is recognize that actually what we do as church and what we do as worship and stuff, it isn't just all about that little one gathering that you have each week. So then I would probably engage throughout the week in other things. So some things can have everybody together, and coffee mornings and kind of those sorts of things are great activities to kind of do together, but then recognizing that everybody actually needs peer support, and whether that's an age related peer support, or whether that's a stage of life kind of peer support in that sense, that there's absolutely those times when you should get kind of mums together, you know, that's a stage of life, that's a thing, that's a way that they can support, and that it gives them a different lens to explore the Bible and all of that sort of stuff. So for me, I think there's something about how do we explore and experience what church is together. And then when we can't do things together well, that's then when we can separate off into other places and stages and kind of what have you. But if there are things we can do together, let's do them together, because God calls us to be together. So let's do that.
That's really just turning the default completely around, isn't it? That we mostly do things separately. Yeah. And then come together for twice a year because it's Christmas, you know, or something like that. And actually the together part of that isn't really together. What it tends to be is we're going to show you something and you show us something different, and actually we're not together. It's a performance, or it's a, you know, the kind of nativity play or something like that you know, it is great, you know, and it's you know, there's nothing wrong with it per se, but it's not a together thing.
Yeah, and I think there is that thing about the whole kind of kids when they kind of participate in a worship service and what have you. It is we view it quite often as performance, and like I've been in countless kind of services or what have you where the kids have got up to do something, whatever that might be, and there's the clapping at the end, and you're like, but you don't clap anybody else. Why are we clapping the children? What yeah. Actually...
And why don't we clap anybody else? You know, it goes both ways, doesn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely.
The organist just played an amazing voluntary. Why don't you clap them?
And that I think is around a kind of misunderstanding of what it is that we mean around participation, and around what our views of what children and young people are there for. Like, are we viewing them as worshippers, or are we viewing them actually as kind of as other things, as people that need to be taught how to do things, and when they've done something well, we'll give them a nice clap, thank you very much. And so yeah, that there is definitely something around when we are coming together, how can we enable everybody that's in that space to participate?
7 months ago, somebody switched the world off, and church stopped happening in kind of physical presence, and everybody had to go online. And that's changed slightly because people are starting to kind of drift back to some form of kind of physical gathering occasionally. If you're not in level 4 and you're back down to 20 people again. I have a sense though that that's been, two things have happened in terms of the kind of move back towards physical worship. It's been very adult driven. So it's about getting adults to go back to church. So there's been much less thought about how do we get children back into worship. So that, I think there'll be a conversation about, can we get Sunday school to go back? And that's and some of that's about guidelines and just working out how we can get people together and all that kind of stuff. But I think the other thing that happened, certainly for us, was that my default was to put online the bit after the children go out, and to then cater for the children in a different way. So we still have Sunday school, and we do it on Zoom, and we do it at 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning because that suits everybody. That's when they're used to coming. And the rest of it is a kind of recorded, go on YouTube and watch kind of thing, which isn't particularly participative, but it's kind of what we ended up with. Kind of thing, because I've got dogs that bark, so Zoom was never going to work. Do you know what I mean? So that was the level of choice that went into that. But what we have discovered is that as Sunday school went online, it actually became a family gathering because the kids couldn't initially manage the technology by themselves, and particularly the younger ones have to have somebody around, kind of thing. So what happens is that the other people around have been drawn into that conversation, which is absolutely brilliant. It's been an absolute revelation. It's changed how we do Sunday school, and we've moved to the point where we've got this kind of weird thing where some of the kids are older. They really shouldn't be at Sunday school anymore, but they keep coming. And actually, what happens now is mostly they lead, which and that seems to me accidentally to have answered some of the stuff that you're talking about. But it's a complete accident. It wasn't planned. Has that been, are we the only people that's happened to, or does that seem like something that's been going on?
No, you're not alone in that at all. But it's been fascinating actually, kind of hearing stories as to what has gone on. So in the first kind of sense, a lot of people were kind of really struggling to work out what can we do. And I think everybody was really focused on, we need to get worship, we need to get this some kind of service online somehow and do all of that. And so everybody defaulted. And I guess when you're in crisis mode, you default to what you know. That's just naturally what we do. And so people defaulted to the thing that they were comfortable with, which was we're going to take what we do in person and we're going to put that online. And then particularly if you're in congregations that didn't have any kind of paid children youth worker or what have you, and it was therefore left to volunteers, actually a lot of them didn't necessarily have the technological capabilities or the know-how or any of that, or even some of the kind of safeguarding things in place that you need to then take your children and young people stuff online. So some were finding that transition then for kind of Sunday schools and stuff, it just took that much longer to then kind of get some of that kind of going. But in the process of I think there was allowed to be a lot more experimentation with our children and young people. So for the kind of more adult, shall we say, worship services that went online, whatever kind of platform that you chose to use right at the beginning, whether it was Facebook, whether it was Zoom, whether it was a YouTube, whether it was live or recorded, generally that decision has stuck. And so you're now 7 months later still using that platform and that thing, and therefore what you're doing in your services is limited by that platform. Whereas with our children and young people, we've found quite a number of folk have been able to experiment a wee bit more. So if they started off on one platform and they found, that works for that sort of thing, but it doesn't work for that, we're like, right, okay, we'll change and we'll use this for this other thing. But I've certainly heard of a number of folk, particularly actually with godly play, they've kind of been able to take the godly play sessions online, which seems quite strange in some senses, because a part of godly play is being in the room and having all these places and these things to wonder and to explore and stuff. But actually, by taking it online, they've, like you, have found actually family groups have suddenly been able to join the circle together, and they've been able to then what has been brilliant about it is they've been able to then be equipping parents to be sharing faith with their kids at home, in the home, with other people doing it. And so then that becomes way more natural to be doing some of that faith at home stuff, which is absolutely ideal. And another one of those things that I've been banging on about for years that we need to do. Suddenly, actually, people have started to see the need for that, while churches try to kind of catch up with doing stuff online. And I, in my own congregation, we do Sunday school online for our kind of P3s and above, and we've found some of them love it, some of them they just can't get there with it.
Yeah.
And so yeah, you're finding all of those kind of differences, and you're like, oh, how do you work out what fits most people? And you have this real desire to meet everybody's needs, but at the same time you're like, actually I just don't have the energy to meet everybody's needs, or the capacity in my week to be able to do that.
And taking into consideration that some people could their needs could be met, but they're choosing to opt out, which is a different kind of thing, isn't it? You know, we've got some young people who are just kind of, do you know what? I've spent so long, particularly at the beginning, I spent so long on online for school and all that kind of stuff. I just don't want to do this anymore. You know, I'm just not interested. You know, it's not that I don't like Sunday school. It's not that I don't like the people that go. It's too much for me. So, you know, I might join in later, but just now, that's not for me.
Yeah.
The other thing I've noticed is that much more than people that need meeting thing, people have been much more aware of that for children and young people than they maybe have for adults. So, you know, you see congregations putting together bags of stuff, whether it's, you know, craft materials or whatever, so that Sunday school can happen. But I haven't been aware of many congregations putting together bags of stuff for the grown-ups, which is fascinating, isn't it? That, you know, all of a sudden we're actually concentrating on the needs of these young people to enable them to participate. And it just seems a bit odd that, you know.
Yeah, but part of me wonders and part of me questions some of the things that folk are doing around this putting bags of stuff together. Yeah. In terms of, I can totally see initially kind of where some of those ideas and stuff were coming from, particularly when right at the beginning and like all the craft shops and stuff were totally out of all supplies because every parent had gone and they were raiding it because they had to do school at home, and so they were using up all of that sort of stuff. So churches who had all of these craft materials in their buildings and all the rest of it were like, absolutely, there's a need, let's get this stuff out to people. And while there's nothing wrong with that per se at all, I think there's kind of missed opportunities around, well, why is it that we're giving, or what is it that they're going to do with that, or how will this pack of craft material help a child in their faith development? Like, what actually are we providing the family that is going to enable this faith stuff at home? Or as we deliver this said bag of craft or whatever that might be, actually, are we seriously taking the opportunity when we meet on that doorstep to do some discipleship? Or are we literally ringing on the doorbell, handing them a bag of stuff and cheerio, we're off kind of thing? So I think I think there's something around what is it that we're doing with these things, and how can we do that, and actually then to absolutely take it a stage further and go, okay, so what about all the adults in the congregation? How are we enabling all of those that are struggling with Zoom or doing small groups online and all the rest of it, when actually the Zoom fatigue is real, and our brains just cannot cope, and like, I hate looking at myself on the screen and while I'm looking at other people people. It's like it does something to your brain that you can't kind of function with. So where are those opportunities for us to be church 24/7 rather than for that hour on the Sunday morning, and engage? So
in terms of, I think, kind of move up the age range a little bit, so kind of teens and young adults, is this form of church just what they've been waiting for? Because, you know, I've got an 18-year-old son who I think didn't notice that we'd been in lockdown for maybe 4 months because he was in his room playing his Xbox. You know, that's his, you know, he goes out, he comes back, he plays with his friends online, you know, so this kind of being online thing is, you know, it's entirely comfortable to him. And there's obviously, you know, folk have had to engage with different things online that, you know, as you say, the kind of, you know, engaging with school and being on Zoom and all that kind of stuff. But you know, it's not difficult for them, except that everything's now online. But is church online where, you know, have they just been waiting for that, or is it as problematic for them as it is for somebody who's 70 and hasn't seen their friends for 6 months?
I think there's something in the fact that it's their native space. Like, they're so used to the digital, and so to take faith into the digital sphere actually speaks volumes in terms of its faith isn't just for that Sunday morning kind of service thing, but actually this can affect the whole of life and all of that kind of thing. But in the same sense, the digital space was the young people's space, and we've invaded it, and we've taken it over, and we've repurposed it for our own purposes, and that is the sort of thing that actually for young people, for young adults, that then becomes a barrier. In terms of, you're coming in and you're invading what was mine now isn't mine, so I'm now going to disengage, thank you very much, because you've kind of taken that over. So there are real pluses and minuses to this whole digital thing. I think it has massively opened up opportunities for those that maybe are on the edges of church or haven't connected with church before or what have you, to explore church from the comfort of their own home without necessarily being seen, or having to do the interaction or all of that. So I think that has been a real benefit, and is something that we need to actually seriously explore and consider how we can make the most of that, and what we can kind of do with that. And then on the other side, we kind of need to look at, okay, so young people are, this is their native space, but they're now disengaging because we've taken over. What is it that we can do with that? What are the now other spaces, or how do we enable their creativity to take over again, and to really go and kind of really let fly with some of those kind of things? And some of it is also about, okay, so what is it that young people, young adults actually need, in terms of what is it that helps their faith grow? And part of that is relationship, and relationship is hard online. And I think that's what folk have been finding, you know, relationship is really hard online, particularly to build from kind of scratch. In that kind of sense, it's been a wee bit easier if you've got that existing relationship to take it online. So relationship is a thing, but they also need experience. You know, they also need to be able to participate in stuff. And yeah, how are we going to do that, and what is that going to kind of look like? And the other thing that they need is to really be able to be given that opportunity to question stuff, to really explore it, and to not be given this is the right answer, this is the wrong answer kind of thing, or this is the only way, or this is what have you. But how do we enable them to question and wrestle and go with that? And that's a thing that's bigger than the question of the digital or the physical space. That's way bigger in terms of what it is that we do as church and how we approach it, and all of that stuff.
Yeah, I've encountered that in real life far too often. That, you know, I run, you know, kind of drama workshops where we take a parable and pull it to bits, and everybody plays a part, and we come up with 5,000 different, you know, things that it could be about. And somebody comes to you at the end and say, yeah, well, that was great, but what's it about? You know, what's the one right answer? And you but that's been their experience of church, that every Sunday somebody tells them what the right answer to the question is, whatever they think, probably tells them what the right question is and the right answer. But that space to allow people to think and to be wrong, I think we're just rubbish at that as church. We're so terrified to say the wrong thing, or to take a position that's provisional to see if it fits. We're just all really scared of that, I think.
Yeah, we've kind of lost the whole kind of I guess the whole practical theology kind of side and way of doing things. I think we automatically default to the Bible is true, there's the one right answer, the one right thing, rather than kind of looking and exploring and going, okay, yeah, so the Bible is that the word of God is saying this, and actually your experience is saying this. How do the two kind of come together, and what's that about, and based on your experience and my experience and yours, and how do we wrestle with all of that?
But I suppose, as you said, bringing people together in a way that makes that meaningful for everybody can be really difficult. And allowing people to participate at a level that suits them without feeling pressured and all that kind of stuff. It's just hard, isn't it? It's hard enough in real life when you can read people properly, and that's what I think that you said, that Zoom's just really hard. That's one of the things I find really difficult about it, that you've got 10 faces looking at you all the time, and you don't have that in real life. You sit in a circle and you're only actually ever looking at one person at a time, really, and you're aware of the other people, but you're not, you don't look at 10 faces at the same time. That's just weird. So to try and encourage people to take part and to know when they want to take part and when they don't want to take part, all that kind of stuff, it's just really hard to facilitate.
Yeah, it's really different. And I think folk have kind of seen that even with the kind of, there's been a positive with it in terms of the kind of church service, particularly for some of those congregations that have kind of moved to using Zoom as their space, because that's actually changed the dynamic, because everybody looks the same. You've all got the same size bit on your screen. You're all there. You're seeing everybody. And that's just so totally different to everybody sitting in pews, in rows, seeing the backs of heads and just the face of the minister. And so that has transformed how they therefore see worship and what worship is about. And that's enabled the whole co-creation and participation element stuff to happen, whereas those that have maybe stuck with the kind of YouTube recorded services or the Facebook Live or what have you, that hasn't been able to happen because of the type of platform and kind of how that is kind of worked. But the whole being able to wrestle with questions and things together, traditionally our services are not the places where we've necessarily been able to do that. We've not set up like how we preach, how we do sermons, all of that stuff. They're just not set up to do that. So you need other spaces in which to have that. And if folk are trying to now start some of those spaces online where you've not had them previously in person in the past, it's an extra added layer of things to get used to, and to try and work with and see how that works. And I think there's a lot of fear, doing new things always brings fear, and so I'm a dreadful one. I'm like, I often don't like to necessarily give my own opinion in things because I think it's been inbuilt into me that you need to be right, and I'm like, but what if I'm wrong? And maybe it goes back to when I was a child and I was like told off for being wrong or something somewhere, but that kind of always that fear inside of not wanting to give of yourself in case people look down on you or look at you in a kind of different light. So not even being wrong, just not knowing. I think there's this kind of sense. I remember when I was 18 being asked to co-lead it was called the Discovery Groups after the Billy Graham crusade with somebody. So that 100 years ago, whenever that was. But thinking, oh my goodness, I'm 18. Imagine being asked as an 18-year-old to kind of co-lead this, right? So we co-led it, and one of the people that came was the session clerk, who was 72, and we had this conversation every week about some really, I suppose, what we would call basic kind of introduction to the Bible stuff. Who's Jesus? What's going on? What are these things? And at the end of that 6 weeks, he said, I've never had those conversations before.
because he'd come to church every week, but he'd come to church every week and, sat and stood up for the 5 hymns and bowed his head for the 3 prayers and listened to somebody tell him what the Bible meant. And he'd never had that opportunity. And I just felt really sad about that, and amazed that to be part of something like that. And it was a hugely formational thing for him at 72. So it's not just about children and young people having the opportunity to have those conversations. It's about recognizing that they're important.
Absolutely. I mean, it's one of those things that I've got a theology degree, I've studied all of this stuff, and actually that was massively formational, and that has led me down that journey of having that more confidence to kind of tackle some of this stuff and look at some of these kind of books and explore some of those kind of things. And I'm like, why is it that we leave some of that theological formation to the preserve of those that we're training for ministry? Why is it that actually that surely that should be something that every Tom, Dick or Harry is in a congregation is being equipped and looking at and being able to explore? Because
on one level, don't tell anybody, but it's not that complicated. Do you know what I mean? So
absolutely,
theology is mostly about having tools to ask the right kinds of questions. That's all it is, and then you ask the questions, then you have a conversation, and that's where you do the theology. But mostly the how-to is about, so what is this that I'm reading? So what kind of literature is it? It makes a massive difference. And then, so given that it's a poem, how would I then engage with it? Or it's a letter, or it's a gospel, or it's history? What questions can I ask of this? And then where does that take me? And that's it. And we really overcomplicate a lot of this stuff. And because I think sometimes, like anything, you put a professional in charge of it, and people default to that because you've got time and space and a bookshelf and, all that kind of stuff. And we do the same with children and youth workers. That, you're in charge of this now, you go and do it. And, I've seen so many churches over the year that the children and youth work actually deteriorates when they employ somebody because everybody else gives up. They leave this poor person to, well, you just do it now because we're paying you mostly, or because you know so much more about it than we do. Whereas the children and youth workers thinking, I'm here to enable you to do this, and there's this huge tension between, the two kind of places.
Absolutely, I've seen it so many times. So does the church of the future? What this is ctl-alt-del-church because we had this feeling 7 or 8 months ago, whenever it was, that the church was going to be renewed, and I'm slightly less optimistic about that now because I have the sense that actually what we'd quite like to do is just get back to normal as soon as we can, please. So how can we avoid that? What we're going to have to do to make sure that doesn't happen? Yeah, I think there's something around, like when lockdown first hit, I and we all kind of came online. I got quite excited, that actually we were going to have to do church differently, and that was going to give folk an opportunity to stop and think, actually, what is it that they wanted, that they thought church was? What is it that we think it's for? And therefore, what are we going to do? How are we going to operate things? But because, as I mentioned, we were in crisis mode, everybody just reverted to what they knew. And so some of my initial hopes were not founded, that they didn't kind of work. And I think then it became, okay, so now we're starting to think about maybe going back into our buildings, and we've experienced this digital stuff. And for some of us, this has been a really good thing. We've liked the change. Therefore, what can we do kind of when we're going back? And so there's a bit of hope that, some of this stuff we might be able to take back in. But I think what has happened due to how we are having to do our worship services in person at the moment, in that they have to be very much a kind of one person up the front leading a service, everybody else sitting there with masks on, not speaking, not involved, all of that stuff. It's almost like we've reverted in our in-person services to way back further than even we were when lockdown first hit. We've had to revert back, and not actually primarily necessarily our fault. That's the fault of, these are the regulations, this is what we have to kind of work with. So on one sense, I have this fear that because that's what we're now doing, that's what we're now always going to do, that is going to be the new normal, so to speak. Whereas I would have the hope that actually this time and this kind of need to reassess everything, to go, okay, we've had some stuff in person, we've had some stuff online, what now? Let's put everything up in the air. What now are we going to do? What have we learned that's great that we therefore want to take forward into whatever this new is going to be? What's the stuff that actually, you know what, we really haven't missed? So let's stop putting our energy on that, and let's put our energy on something different. And what now is it? Who is it that we now are as a community? What is it that we can now kind of go forward and do? And I would really hope and like to see that maybe some of these lessons around people participating would really start to kind of come forward and become far more of a kind of, this is who we are. We're here as a community. We all participate in this. And I'd like to start seeing some of this kind of, can we build this culture of questioning so that it's normal for us to explore our faith together. And that's totally cool and totally relevant and totally right, and kind of what we need to do. And then, yeah, I'd love to see us actually really take this intergenerational community stuff quite seriously and think about how that kind of works. And I think the way we have to get to these places is to take this opportunity, to take this time and go, what is church? You know, what is it that we mean when we talk about church? Is it that hour on a Sunday morning kind of service thing, or actually is church something quite different? And if it is different, what is it supposed to be? And therefore, how do we become that? How do we truly become this kind of community that loves one another, that cares for one another, that worships together, that explores the Bible together, that prays together, that eats together? How do we do all of that? And within doing all of that, recognize that children and young people are just as much a part of that as the 74-year-olds that have been there all their lives and all of that sort of stuff. How do we take the priesthood of all believers seriously, and really catch on to that and use people's gifts and see that kind of going and shaping, and then maybe how can we take some of these kind of more structural things and how we organize ourselves and what we do and change some of that to match what our vision of church actually is.
Yeah, it's been interesting even at that level, the kind of organizational stuff, to see how some of the kind of grown up structures of reacted to that. So some, you know, in the kind of presbytery level, some presbyteries have pretty much thrown all the kind of rules and regulations out of the window, and they're having really creative conversations that still, you know, they meet the purpose, but they've kind of redefined the purpose of what presbytery's for. So presbytery's become a place where people can support one another, as opposed to where people can nod a deliverance through that isn't really going to impact them anyway, because it's a procedural thing that, well, you know, to be honest, nobody cares about, and you know, it doesn't apply to us, or it does in such a way that, well, you know,
we'll just ignore it anyway.
We'll either just ignore it or we'll nod and we'll do it. But, you know, the reality is that life's so different now, it doesn't really make any difference. And it's that is played out in all kinds of ways, that some people have clung to the structure, you know, and the regulations, and, you know, you can't do that until we've decided, you know, to give you permission, and other people just went and did it, you know. So there's a whole kind of thing about communion at the start.
Mm-hmm.
You know, can we have communion online? Is it even? And folk are off, you know, oh, we had communion last week. Oh, the theological forum's having a conversation about that. Well, that's great. I wonder if they'll catch up soon. Yep. You know, and it's fascinating to see that, you know, how sometimes, you know, they say that, what was it, crisis is the mother of invention, you know, so yes. So sometimes you just have to try stuff and see what happens. But you're right, it's so easy then to get stuck in your first response. So if your first response is, what do the rules say about this? Then, you know, you're not going to get much further than that. And then I actually hadn't given any thought whatsoever to this. We have to go back, and there's a particular way that's going to happen. And then it's going to be really hard to change out of that. But it'd almost be better if we didn't go back at all until we could go back fully, and then we can have that conversation about what this might look like.
Yeah, and I think a lot of congregations have found that. So some of those congregations that have started back meeting in their church services initially, like when you kind of put in this kind of process of you had to book your seat for church kind of thing, and they were oversubscribed and turning people away. But 2, 3, 4 weeks down the line, they were not getting enough people to meet their numbers, because people were going and experiencing something that they were like, this really is not it. It's just not cutting, because we're having to literally just come and sit, and all the elements that they had been missing, the interaction with people and the being able to sing and all of that, we can't do at the moment. So it was just not getting there. And so church can be an incredibly passive experience anyway, and so when you take away the very few things that you're allowed to do, then it, you kind of wonder, even further, what is it? What do we think we're doing with this? But then what do we think we're doing anyway? But it's so easy just to, I said, I did a job like yours for 20 years, and I'm still, we have 5 hymns, 3 prayers and a sermon. It's hard to, it's hard to change it. And some of that's just about, that's maybe as much about me as it is about the congregation, because if I ask my congregation, they'll say, yeah, we'll do whatever you want. So there's some of that's about just, I'm scared, even though I know all of this stuff and I know it's good, and but I'm terrified that it doesn't work. So, convince me. Why should I just jack all the stuff in that we do and try all of this? Because it sounds amazing. Oh, why do it? Because God is bigger than we are, I think, and God has this real kind of desire that he is able to meet his people, and we need to get out of the way often. And I think some of our structures and some of our ways of doing things actually are, in essence, causing more harm than good. And I think we've got to kind of be honest with ourselves about that, and let's get serious and let's really seek God and go, okay, so God, what is it that you're looking for? What is the way that you want us to be? How do you want to kind of interact with one another? And then be bold, and take those steps. And yes, we need to, there's something around not jumping in with this, right, we're massively changing everything and we're going to launch this thing. Sometimes that can work, but sometimes actually you need to take the smaller steps, and then kind of do it a bit more kind of gradually and get folk on board and all of that sort of stuff. And that really is dependent on your own kind of context and what kind of goes on. But maybe now is this time where we've got a bit more used to doing things differently, that actually we can start to explore together as a congregation. So who are we? And what is that about? And who do we want to be? And when we kind of get to these stages, how do we want to shape our life together? What is it that we want to kind of look at with some of that, and to make sure that when we're having those kind of conversations, that maybe it's not just the Kirk session, or it's not just those few interested people, but actually that you have some children in that conversation, because children can be the most insightful of people, and they're often the ones that aren't afraid to ask the questions. So often we were talking about that we find it difficult to ask the questions and to give the answers. Actually, kids they'll just say it how they see it. So let's use that gift, and let's explore some of that kind of stuff together. And I think there's something about us just being brave, but just being willing to experiment and to be different and to try different things. And it's not to say it has to work, and to let's for goodness sake, let's be okay with failure. We've got a wee bit more used to it with being online when the technology doesn't quite work and this doesn't happen and all of that. How can we celebrate our failures and use those as things that are going to kind of help? And how can we look at all the other people round about us and the stuff that they're doing and be encouraged by it, Whereas before we used to look at other people down the road and we're like, oh, we looked on with envy and we wanted to be like them and to do all of that. Whereas now during this kind of time, actually, I've seen a lot more people kind of forming decent relationships with folk from other congregations, whether it's ministers with ministers or youth workers or whatever that might be. Everybody's actually like, we're all in this together. We're all church. We're all doing this together. So how can we take some of that and kind of all together be exploring some of these? So what is it? What do we mean by church? What's that going to be? What are the little steps that, have you tried that? Have you tried that? Oh, maybe we could do that. Maybe we could kind of pick up that. But let's always not forget the why question. So often we can look for the next program model or the next thing. Let's ignore programs, stuff programs. Church isn't programs. Church is relationship. Church is people. How do we move off that and into some of those things?
One of the things that we have, I suppose, discovered is, for the vast majority of people, they go to their church, and that, I live in a village and there are people that have lived here all their lives and have only really ever been to one church in all of that time, or maybe two. So one of the things that this has allowed people is to go and visit other places and to hear other voices, which could be, if I was incredibly insecure, a really difficult thing, because what if they like them better than they like me? So there is some of that. There's undoubtedly some of that, and there are, without being in any way humbled, there are loads of people out there who are doing stuff that's much better than what I'm doing. So, and people will discover that, and I think in the past we've been really scared of that because, but less so because people would have to go somewhere else, have to physically go and find these people and go somewhere else. Whereas now you don't have to go anywhere; you can just find other stuff. So I guess, for me, the question then is, so do you engage with that really proactively and say, look, Susan Brown does a brilliant morning reflection every single day at 3 o'clock in the morning, whenever she walks her dog. I'm not going to do that. There's no danger that I'm getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to walk my dog and record a reflection while I'm doing that. But I'm more than delighted to post Susan's every day. Yeah. Our Boys Brigade hasn't been meeting, but 14th Leith very quickly got their anchor boys online and do this amazing program. So we just go there, because in some ways it doesn't matter because you're all online. You can be part of something that's far away or close together. But one of the things I suppose that then gives, we're talking about developing relationships, and one of the things I'm a little bit concerned about is that how do you then foster those relationships when we do end up in a kind of in-person? We go back, because at some point we will go back and we plan to keep doing the online stuff, but you're almost kind of facilitating two different kinds of relationships. Then you've got the people that can come, and then you've got these other people who are in Canada or just down the road or wherever, and are they members of my congregation? I don't really know now. Whereas I know that there's a line that goes round this place and those people are my responsibility. And it opens up all kinds of questions like that, doesn't it? It's a what does it mean to belong? Which is a question the church has been struggling with for years and years and years.
Yeah. And that whole kind of parish boundary thing, actually, do we need to keep that or do we not? Are there different ways that we can kind of keep hold of that kind of third article declaratory that the whole kind of, we've got places for everybody, wherever they are, that they are part of something. Can we do that in a different way that's maybe not the kind of parish system? And can we explore some of that? And maybe there's even kind of, I guess, some learning maybe from things like Messy Church and some of the fresh expressions ways of kind of doing things that you can see. So Messy Church is seen as a separate congregation, so actually we've got that language and we've got that way of thinking a wee bit. So you have your kind of in-building congregation or what have you. You have your messy church congregation, and some congregations, churches, ministers, they're looking after 3 or 4 congregations, but they all have their own separate identities. So is there anything wrong with then an online congregation just being added into the mix in that sense? I think it begs the question of changing actually the role of the minister a wee bit and the role of people leading some of these things, because you can't keep adding more and more new congregations and expecting ministers to still be standing at the end of the week, in using the model that we would at the moment. But are there other ways that we can reconsider what it is when we talk about ministry and the recognized ministries and all of those sorts of things? Are there other methods and ways of looking at stuff that is going to allow a wee bit more freedom for some of these new and exciting things to bubble up and to be allowed to flourish rather than being put down under a structure? How can we do that?
And there's some of that being part of lots of different things or lots of different places that actually our young people have that experience all the time. When they go off to college or university and they leave home, they still have roots in their home congregation, but they might join a Christian union or they might join a congregation in wherever the university or their college is. And so they inhabit these kind of dual identity things where they belong to St Andrews or Glasgow or Edinburgh or wherever they find themselves, but they live in Auchtermuchty or Inverness, or it doesn't, we negotiate those. We all do that.
Yeah, and I think young people do it even when they are young people before they've left home.
Yeah.
I think it's quite common, given that the numbers of young people in a lot of our congregations are actually relatively small. So it's not uncommon for there to be a youth work project that spans 3 or 4 congregations. Yeah. And for young people to be in one on a Sunday morning, and then for the youth group during the week or during the evening or whatever, that are another one, and then for something else that they're another one. Actually, they do that way more than we do, and they do it crossing denominational boundaries too, very easily, very, very easily. And I think that's one of the things that's been coming out of Ruth Perrin's recent research from Durham University on kind of young adult faith development and formation and stuff. And she was talking about actually that these generations coming now do not see church denominationally in the way that maybe in the past we all did, and they're a lot more kind of willing to shift and change and find the church community that kind of fits where they are and what they're doing, rather than thinking, oh, I've always been part of the Church of Scotland, I'm going to stay in the Church of Scotland, this is going to kind of happen. And part of me does wonder if some of that is going to become a wee bit more common for some of the older generations too, in terms of now we've all had this opportunity where we can go visit all of these different churches, whether they're in Scotland, whether they're around the world, wherever they might be, and we've all been able to experience some of the differences that come from different worship styles, from different kind of traditions, all of that. If actually that is going to allow us to really kind of knock some of these denominational boundaries down a wee bit more, and actually kind of let's really be the body of Christ together. Yeah. Let's celebrate the things that we are unique, and let's explore what they are, and let's get to grips with what they are and why we have them. But then let's work and meet and stuff together with kind of everybody else. Are there ways that we can kind of look and explore some of that a wee bit more?
You just mentioned some research there, which is great. It's good that somebody's reading something and people are actually writing, which has been one of my things for years and years, that people who do this stuff don't ever write it down. It's a real thing. So there are very few kind of route maps almost, that people are, you mentioned Dave Sinos earlier, people like that who are actually grappling with this stuff and writing it down so that other people can have the same kind of thoughts and question and move things on. So help us, who should we be looking at? What kind of stuff's out there to help us to grapple with some of this stuff, apart from phoning you every 5 minutes?
You can attempt to phone me or email me if you want, and that's fine in some senses. I think there are various kind of different thinkers, different people. So one really good place to get certainly some kind of recent research is the Youthscape Centre for Research. They started a kind of particular centre for researching into work with young people and all of that. And they've got some really fascinating stuff recently kind of come out about young people's spiritual practices. Really good kind of stuff within that. The Youth for Christ have done a suite of 3 different research projects looking at the digital space, looking at faith in general, and spiritual practices again. So they're really good things to look at. Ruth Perrin's one on young adult stuff. Hers is a book rather than a research report, which is great, called Changing Shape. And then some of the other kind of thinkers. So we've mentioned Dave Sinos. He's a really good one around spiritual styles and children's faith formation. He's got a brand new book out at the moment called Little Theologians. How do we look at children and see them as theologians, and how does that come? And he's got one coming out soon around intergenerational preaching, which will be amazing. I've heard some of his initial findings from this research stuff that he's done, and it's going to be fabulous. And then the other thinker that I think it's really good to grapple with is Andy Root. And some of his stuff. So he brought out a book just at the start of lockdown around it was called the End of Youth Ministry ? And that really trying to look at, so what is youth ministry for? And it was all around actually broader than that. What is church for? What is the point? Why do we kind of do all of this, and how can we do all of that? He's got some great stuff.
I think I said to somebody fairly recently that Fresh Expressions is just youth work for grown-ups, because it is. And, folk can argue with me about that if they want, but I'm right. And I know I am. So, I think for people who are maybe listening to this thinking, I'm not a children's worker or a youth worker, that's not really my thing. I would hugely encourage you to go and look at some of this stuff, because it's not just about how we work with children and young people. It's about grappling with questions about what church is, and actually those findings will inform the next lot of stuff that's written about what does church look like for grown-ups, because these kids are the ones that are going to be doing that research and taking that forward and leading the church. So it's hugely important that folk engage with this stuff, even if you don't think it's for you. It really is. Absolutely.
I think it's one of those common things that you get folk kind of thinking, children's and youth work, we'll leave that to those volunteers, and we'll leave them. And you're like, actually, the only way anything works is if we grapple with all of these questions together. Because as I've said all the way through, children and young people are part of the church. We can't keep them off. We can't keep just leaving the thinking around that to certain people. Bring it in, people. It's all part of the whole. We all need to really take it seriously.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time, Suzi. That's been a fantastic conversation.
You are very welcome. Thank you.